Great, so we'll get started. So welcome to everyone. We have a fabulous lineup for you this morning, which brings together all parts of the legal ecosystem. So for the judiciary, we have the Honourable Mrs. Justice Cockrell. Mrs. Justice Cockrell is a High Court judge and judge in charge of the Commercial Court between 2022 and 2020 and 2022. For the bar, we have Annalisa Day, KC, a silk at Fountain Court Chambers. Annalisa practices across a broad range of commercial areas, and she's described by the legal directories as a standout genius and an absolute rock star at the top of her game, who is a leading lawyer of her generation. Client side, we have Nina Best, GC of Delinian, a private equity owned company, which includes a portfolio of specialised global businesses. Prior to her current role as General Counsel, she played a pivotal role as Chief Privacy Officer at the company, spearheading the establishment of a robust global data protection framework. Throughout her career, she's honed her expertise navigating complex legal landscapes with finesse and foresight. Nina's based in Nottingham, where she shares her life with her wife and 2 children. For private practice, we have Nikki Edwards, who is a partner in the Commercial Dispute Resolution team at Howard Kennedy and Vice President of the London Solicitors Litigation Association. Nikki is also a commercial and workplace mediator and mum of 2. We're also joined by Avneet Baryan, who is Senior Associate at Mills Reeve and Vice President of the Junior London Solicitors Litigation Association. Helen Griffiths also joins me today. Helen is Head of Business Development at Fountain Court Chambers and supports the set in creating and implementing its client and business development strategies, both domestically and internationally. And Helen is helping me with the tech today, so I'm very grateful to Helen, and she is going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if you do have any questions as we go through this morning, please do pop those in the Q&A, and I will be inviting Helen to share those with us as we go through the morning. And finally, who am I? So I'm Claire Rayson. I am a consultant and an individual and team coach. I'm the director of Client Talk, the host of podcast Lawyers Coach. I'm also the author of the Class of 2002 Diversity Report and co-author of Preparing for Partnership, and I am a mum of 4. So before we start, I wanted to give some statistics just to set the scene. So women remain underrepresented in the legal profession. In private practice, women represent only 32% of equity partners in England and Wales, despite the profession being 53% female. Women make up 40% of barristers, yet while 60% of pupils are female, they make up only 20% of silks. Women are underrepresented in the judiciary too, so around a third of court judges and half of tribunal judges are women, but the proportion remains lower in senior court appointments. Is it any better client side? Yes, although sadly still not 50-50. So the proportion of women on FTSE 350 boards is around 40%, and for FTSE 100, women hold around 41% of board positions. So I mentioned my report, and again, just to give some background and some more statistics. So if we look at solicitors, new entrants to the role were around 50-50 by gender by 1994, so some 30 years ago. Fast forward around 10 years, and 2002, I started life as a solicitor at Herbert Smith. The cohort I started with was roughly more women than men, and I decided to research to find out what had happened to my intake. Now, despite 73% staying in the law, keeping a roughly equal split between men and women in fee-earning roles, only 23% of the women made it to partner or GC versus 59% of the men. SRA data shows that women are 4 times less likely to progress than their male counterparts, and these numbers are in line with that. Now, what was behind that? As you can imagine, lots of different layers and complexities, but three things stood out for me. One was the 24/7 culture, which harms women more than men. The second were the traits that we identify in partners, I found to be gendered male. So research shows that gender stereotypes label women in terms of communal traits versus agentic traits for men, so things like ambition, assertiveness, autonomy. And finally, women choose to self-deselect from the process, and there are lots of studies around gender and choice. Now, I want to kind of conclude that actually by saying that men are also harmed by the 24/7 culture, and there's equally lots of statistics about the legal profession and how it is burnt out. And I also found that they find it harder to choose to step away, and they also have to conform to a model of leadership that might not suit them. So lots of statistics there, lots of numbers, but what I want to do is I want to bring the panel in, and the way we're going to do this today is it's going to be a conversation. I have some big questions and big topics that I want to ask of our panel. And the first is, now that our Lady Chief Justice is female, is it merely a waiting game? Or do we need to do more to ensure that there is parity at all levels of the profession? And Mrs. Justice Cockrell, I'd like to start with you, if I may. Our Lady Chief Justice provides visibility at perhaps the highest level. Is that important? Is there more that we need to do?
I think that question of visibility is incredibly important. I mean, of course, we believe and we hope that things are getting better, and we can see things getting better, but it is the seeing that really matters. And Sue can't do it all by herself. And I know it's a subject that she's very passionate about as well, that although we can see things getting better, we need to make sure that we are seeing women in positions of prominence, in seminars, in webinars, in all sorts of areas, so that we have that facilitation for, if you can see it, you can be it, and also to remind people of the different dimension that maybe the female perspective brings to things. So we do need to do more, and we do need to constantly check, are we giving enough visibility to female participants?
Thank you. Annalisa, would you like to join
Yes.
in?
I mean, I think the stats that you've given at the beginning are striking. Just looking at the council statistics, you know, we've been hovering around that 20% for too long. So I think we need to look at, particularly subconsciously, what may be happening. There was a fantastic announcement recently by the judiciary about using more junior counsel in court, which has had a brilliant effect. And I think really allowed people to think about it. But obviously, one of the things that also draws attention to is that at the highest appellate level, we're actually seeing the number of lead counsel who are women going down, which should not be happening. So again, looking at ways, what are the factors leading to that, and really trying to think about and broaden the pool, I guess, and make people think about when they're selecting counsel, why are they doing that? Because I think no one thinks that most people are doing this deliberately, but you may just be using the same people, the people your firm's always used or clients have always used. So I think it's very important that we think about how do we give people more access to more choice.
Thank you. Nikki?
Yeah, I think the statistics are actually really important, because something that I think everybody needs to grasp is the rate of progress. So at the moment, I think 37% of partners in law firms are women. 10 years ago, that was 32%. So, and that is a decade during which most firms have been doing and saying the right thing. We have all these pledges that, you know, came about a long time ago now, and we're doing these webinars, and, you know, everybody, as Annalisa says, you know, it's not intentional. But if we're only increasing at a rate of 0.5% per year on average, well, that's not fast enough, is it? And so I think, unfortunately, what we're doing now is not enough. And yes, more of the same, please, but also we need to think about what more can we do that will really make a difference, not just to creating those opportunities for women, but also excuse me, also for to ensure that women want to take the opportunities, because I think a real problem within private practice is that most women, when they start in the profession, and there's 62% of them versus, you know, 38% of men, or whatever the statistics are, they think, yeah, I probably want to be a partner. They start off, they're ambitious, you know, in equal proportions to the men, I think. Yet, for some reason, by the time they get 7 or 8 years PQE, we're in this situation and they're not getting partnership. And I think we as a profession need to recognise that part of that is because they don't want it by then. It's not appealing. They'd rather go and do what Nina's doing and have a great job with flexibility, but, you know, also huge intellectual stimulation and, you know, all the rest of it. So I think it's really important to grasp how slowly things are progressing, despite the fact that we are doing a lot of good things.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to Nina, and then I'm going to turn to Avneet last, but definitely not least, because I want Avneet to kind of reflect on what she might like to see in order to be able to make that decision to step up. But Nina, what are your thoughts on kind of where we got to so far in the conversation?
So I guess the word that I'm reflecting on slightly is it just a waiting game? So will it all just happen naturally? And it slightly follows on from what Nikki was saying. And I just want to share a bit of a personal example, I guess, of that. So I'm a huge proponent of positive action. So actually doing positive things that can help to make things better, to make things fairer, to make things more equal. So you mentioned the FTSE board. So there is improvements have been made there, but that has been due to positive action. It very much has been due to positive action. And this isn't positive discrimination, sort of giving preferential treatment regardless of merit. This is targeted things which can help those from different backgrounds to get into areas so that it can help with the representation that Mrs. Justice Cockrell speaks to, which is incredibly important. My example, my personal example, so where I currently work, there was a positive action program in place at the time. And my predecessor sits a company down in London, and my predecessor said, I want you to search far and wide, change your search parameters, and I want you to look for people who don't look like me. He was a middle-class white male, went to Oxford, and said, I don't want people who look like me. I don't want people who've got backgrounds like me. And I came into the search criteria through that. I then went through exactly the same rigorous program that everybody else did, and through that managed to get the role, and then subsequently was mentored by him to understand the world in which I found myself, which is different, and people who come from my backgrounds like myself aren't used to it and do need that support. That's the positive action that actually does help to start to move the needle and get people like me into professions like this. And then I think that we can help others who look like myself and come from backgrounds like myself to get into the profession. But it takes a lot of work. It certainly isn't just a waiting game and it will just happen. It's very much positive action to help to change the dial on all of those things.
Thank you. And I assume, Nina, that he didn't say there can't be anyone that looks like me. It's just I don't want a full list of people who look like me.
I want a short list that's diverse, was his ask, Nikki. It was a short list that looked diverse. And if I wasn't the right person, I wouldn't have got the job. But it was go wider. And there was an element of that is the fact that I live within the region. So I'm not down in London. And that was a big gamble, I think, for him to be able to go for somebody who was outside of the area as well. But yeah, that's right, Nikki.
Thank you. And one of the things that I want to try and draw out of all of you is what kind of positive action we can all take based on the different roles that we have. Avneet, over to you. What positive action would you like to see, or what reflections have you had through the things that you've heard already this morning?
Yeah, I mean, so I think from my perspective, what I've seen, and I'm now, I think, 6 years PQE later on this year, is just seeing role modeling, and actual, from the top, making partnership appealing, just like Nikki's already alluded to. And what that means is things like, a partner saying, oh, I'm going to go pick up my kids. I'm going to sort out dinner. I've got a play. I've got a Pilates class. And, you know, and that's not just for people with children. It's promoting a kind of a supportive, you know, environment also for those that don't have children, and actually at all levels of PQE. So I think that's one thing that certainly can be done, because, you know, it is daunting. I mean, I have a child myself, and it's hard. The juggle is very, very hard. And it's just seeing that, okay, well, somebody higher up can do it, and they don't have a nanny, and they, you know, they're being real to themselves, and they're also looking after themselves at the same time, you know, exercise, you know, showing that balance, and being able to get, you know, not working at weekends. So that's one thing. And then another point that Nina mentioned is about action. And what I think it would be a very, very positive development is, you know, at all levels, you know, from encouraging juniors, even from trainee paralegal level, to say, to kind of write articles, go and speak at public, giving them opportunities to do that, because it builds confidence, and that is what it, you know, and you're supporting that woman progress in her career. And you know, it's very hard when you say it's just women, because obviously you want to be fair as well. But I think we've got a responsibility to really see the kind of trainee paralegal associate group and see, okay, well, I want to nurture that talent, and I want to kind of give back. So that's what I'd say, the two kind of things that can be really easily done.
Thank you. I can see some questions are coming through in the chat, but please, if you're joining us this morning, do put some more questions in the chat for our panelists. We'll be coming to those shortly. I know that one of the things that we have touched on is the 24/7 culture, and we will get there. But I think before we do, one of the things that I'd like to find out from all of you is some of the challenges that you've all faced. I think sometimes we forget that our own stories are important, and that we can learn from our own stories. And it kind of, Avneet nodding, kind of, you know, I think it helps, you know, talks to the visibility point that Mrs. Justice Cockrell was talking about at the beginning. So I'd like to invite you to perhaps share some of the challenges that you faced in your careers and how you overcame them, so that we can start to perhaps think about, you know, what more we could do as a system to help overcome some of those challenges. So I don't know who wants to go first. Yes, Mrs. Justice Cockrell.
Hi. Well, as the oldest person reaching furthest back into ancient history, I think I should go first. I was called back in 1990. I became a silk in 2011 and a High Court judge in 2017. Now, going back to 1990, we are talking about a different world. Although, interestingly, at that point, even then, we were 50-50 entering the legal profession. And that is one of the shockers. It really picks up Nikki's point on the slowness of progress, because when I entered the legal profession, I thought the battle was all but won, because we were going in at 50-50. Though I have to say, in the commercial bar, we were not. Women were pretty much non-existent. I had to become fluent in cricket and rugby in my first few years in order to have conversations. So it was pretty self-evident challenges. There wasn't a lot of direct or overt sexism. It was kind of surprise that one was there, assumptions against one being able to be tough enough, to be competent enough, and always the lack of a comfort zone. I was operating in a world where I had no comfort zone and everybody else seemed to have one. Fundamentally required a lot of stubbornness, a lot of finding the very rare female trailblazers, which is why I'm passionate about visibility, you know, to have those people to look up to see, yes, it's possible. Very importantly, support from the rare other women who were my peers, creating a tribe. A lot, and this really resonates with what Nina said, a lot of relying on male allyship. You know, I had a number of men who went out of their way to bring me into their comfort zone. And while I couldn't live there because it's not my place, it really helped me. but increasingly younger women as they came up, supporting me, showing me different ways of doing things and reminding me how important it is for all of us to think about, as we progress, what we can see that the next woman can do and to show them what that step is and help them over it. You know, the impact of the challenges in my profession was, as I progressed, the vast majority of my cohort dropped out, just as Claire reports. By the time I took Silk, I looked around, all the people who joined with me had gone. And that now resonates, of course, in the numbers we see at senior levels. There's very few of us up here sort of going for those senior roles. We've got to take more steps to do better.
Thank you. Who'd like to jump in next?
I
Nina?
don't mind going after Mrs. Justice Cockrell, just because I'm slightly reflecting on the cricket, Mrs. Justice Cockrell. So now in 2024, that is one of my biggest gaps with those who are around me, is my lack of understanding of cricket. Intellectually, I feel on par with them. Professionally, I feel on par with them, but I don't understand cricket, so I must do better there. Challenges, Claire. So I guess my sort of slight reflection in it is where I've ended up because of it. I guess the path I have chosen is perhaps because of what I felt the challenges for me at the time. So I was in private practice in 2007, and I slightly struggled in private practice. I didn't feel like I quite fit in. I don't know that was necessarily because I was female. There was lots of females in the cohort. I later discovered, I always think that's a strange word to use, I discovered that I was gay. I'm a person of colour. I come from a working class background. I don't know what it was, why I didn't feel like I fit in, but I didn't. The way that I dealt with that challenge at the time was attempt to fit in. So I sort of tried to make myself, I was reflect on it being white middle class. I tried my best to do and be that. And then I ended up leaving private practice and went in-house. And actually that coincided with me coming out. And I really found myself. I think I found myself personally, professionally, and I thrived when I found myself. I thrived professionally. That was a great space and time for me. There was a lot of positive action at that organisation that I worked. There was lots of leadership courses that I went on, and I really grew professionally as well. And then I found myself where I am today. I guess if I reflect on it, there were and are challenges. I think the legal profession is an incredibly strange place. I sort of dip my toe back into it every so often, going into private practice organisations now, and I sort of go back to that child that I was back then and sort of lose a bit of confidence again and find it quite an intimidating space. And I don't get intimidated generally, but I actually do find that place sort of quite strange. The thing that I think for overcoming the challenges, it's really similar to what Mrs. Justice Cockrell was saying, that there were people around me throughout my journey who helped me along the way. There are people in private practice who helped me to understand the norms. I have some quite funny stories of where I wasn't quite behaving as I should, and I was sort of taught the lessons of how to behave in that office environment, and that really helped me. That was peers, that was females around me who were deeply supportive. Then there were the allies, Mrs. Justice Cockrell, so the allies, the male allies who have actively mentored and supported me, and they sponsored me, spoke in those rooms where I wasn't able to be in, and they spoke and stood up for me and said, no, actually, this is a person who can do this job. And that really helps, because they're the ones who've got the ear of those in those senior positions, and that's really helped and supported me. And then strength, a big gut tongue of strength, and just sort of getting through it. I guess that slightly then takes me to what can we do, because one thing that I've always sat slightly uncomfortable is it's those strong females who get through and get to the top, and that's great. It's really good that there's lots of strong females when you get up there, but actually it shouldn't have to be, because it's not always strong males who are up there or really good males. So actually I wonder that we can really help to get more into those positions and into those spaces, so that they don't just have to be the strong ones who do that. And that kind of circles back to that positive action again, I guess. Thank you. And some themes already coming out: confidence, the needing to fit in and mold to what's around, which is interesting. Annalisa, sorry, I'll come to you next.
Thanks. I suppose my story's it can be encapsulated by saying I never really thought about whether I was male or female until I had children. So it was completely neutral until that point. And then I had very difficult pregnancies. I miscarried during a trial. I couldn't tell anybody. I had hyperemesis gravidarum at that point, again, vomiting 24 hours a day, not able to tell anybody. And I found it very difficult and, quite on my own, with a couple of friends who've been through it who were very supportive. But I felt this thing of being able to be yourself, this thing that I felt I couldn't talk about it. And if I talked about it, people wouldn't see me as strong and wouldn't see me as someone who they wanted to send cases to. And then when I was pregnant, I had a trial adjourned and the judge referred to it as Miss Day's problem about when it was going to be relisted. And I think those things have changed. I know now there's a lot of support with emails. Judges are very sympathetic if people are feeling unwell in pregnancy, so they can tell the judge, but they don't necessarily have to tell clients. So I think that's helped and is a lot better. But I do still think that women get judged. So then when I had my children, both my children have ADHD quite severely. And at points, I've definitely been told that's my fault because I work, or made to feel. I had a very difficult divorce. My ex-husband had depression. Again, a lot of people implied to me that I wasn't a good mother or a good wife because I worked, full time. And I think that's very difficult. And I think that does need to change and people to be more supportive. And we have to be aware of those double standards that can be applied, both by women themselves, but there are definitely people who have made comments to me. I remember coming back from a work trip and I was out with everybody after the conference and someone said to me, "Oh, I hear you're in a nightclub. Do you think that's appropriate now you're a mother?" I mean, and this is a very nice person who I think, I had to sort of explain that would he say that to a man? I think we need to be very aware of that. But even now, every day, I would say I'm described as aggressive when a man would be assertive. The language we use to describe women is very important. And I think we all need to think about that. I think about that with my own daughter. I have a son and a daughter, and I do naturally describe them in quite gender stereotypical ways. And I have to consciously think about that myself. But it does get you down. Again, when I took Silk, lots of people said, "Oh, you only got it so young because you're female." Those kind of comments, after a while, they do drag you down. So I'd like to see a world in which, as Nina says, people can be themselves rather than having to have a front and pretend. Equally, there are times when it's not appropriate to do that. So it's judging that. And I think the way I've got through it is I have had both male and female, very, very supportive people, a small group who've been incredibly supportive. And some of the judiciary actually have been the most supportive. So that's fantastic. Having that is really, really important. And as Mrs. Justice Cockrell has said, seeing those role models is incredibly important. And it's something I've realized more and more, the older I've got and talk to younger women who want to see that advocate who's a woman, because then they can imagine themselves, want to see that judge, want to see the Chief Justice being a lady. So I think that is really important. As long as those role models can be honest about the difficulties as well as the successes, because otherwise I talk to some women and they're like, "Well, I don't want that route of having the nanny or whatever." For me, that's been the only way I can do it. And I enjoy having that support. And I think you should not feel guilty if that's the route you go down. But I think there should be other ways of being able to do it and being successful. And the final thing I just wanted to say is also really important, that we don't just keep women in the profession, but we keep them doing the highest quality and level of work. So there's a saying about women being over-mentored and under-promoted. I get asked to be on endless committees, to speak at lots of conferences. That's great, but I'd also like to be there doing the best quality work and ensuring that for everybody.
Thank you. And I think lots there to unpick. And I think it's interesting, this kind of conversation around childcare. I once interviewed Miriam Gonzalez, and I remember she was saying about the taboo around childcare and how, you know, if you're in a room full of men who happen to be fathers, you wouldn't necessarily ask them who was looking after their children, whereas as mothers, it's something that often comes up. And I think, you know, I've got 4 children, and I often hid the fact that I had children. I wouldn't have pictures on my desk because I didn't want to be seen to be less than because I was a mother. So I think having honest conversations and open conversations is really important. So thank you. Nikki.
Yeah, so I can really relate to a huge amount of what has been said already, and could have said the same things, basically. I think reflecting on what's being said and what's come out for me, I think a challenge for me was a lack of role models, actually. I think, you know, the sort of intersectionality of my background, being from a working class background, not really understanding this world. And so, you know, even the women within law firms often didn't look like me, sound like me, seem like me. Kind of finding those people that I maybe wanted to be, or, you know, not to be them, but to live their life. And I remember when I was kind of thinking about whether to go for partnership in a previous law firm after I'd had my first child, kind of deciding, do I stick around or do I do something else? And it was an amazing firm, American firm, really good quality work, really great people. But at that point in time, when I looked around at the people at the top, you know, there was one female partner, and she, you know, was amazing, but she had a full-time nanny, and she had a very different life to me. She was from a very different world to me. She had, you know, great connections for business development, etc., that I just didn't have. And so I couldn't see that person that I thought, oh yes, I fit into this club, you know, I want to stick around here so that I can get to the top. And so I feel like for me, it's very important now that I've found my home, that I am that role model, and that, you know, there is a variety of role models. So it's not just about having some men and some women, it's actually about having a broad range of different types of men and different types of women with different qualities who, you know, if they have children, they are sharing a little bit about their private life to the extent that they're comfortable. How do they do it? How do they juggle it? Do you have a nanny? Do you have a husband or a wife who stays at home and doesn't work, or, you know, that sort of thing? The way that we did it is, my husband is a lawyer as well, and we went down the kind of shared parental leave route. So he had 6 months leave with our youngest child, and that's something that I think is, again, important to share and talk about, because it, you know, it's part of how I've got to where I am, but also it's part of what makes it all work for us and our family unit, that our children feel equally connected to both of us. If they, you know, come down in the night or whatever, it's not always me that they want. Sometimes it's him, sometimes it's me. It's very balanced. You know, I don't need to worry about going away on a work trip. I don't need to worry about going away on a girls' weekend for a few days. And I think a lot of that started from him being involved from a very early stage, which then gave him the confidence that, you know, it's, you know, it makes sense that if I had spent all of the time with our daughter, of course he would have felt like, well, you're better at it, so when things are tricky or whatever, you can just deal with it. So I think things like that can really help. And it's not for everyone, but I think for those of us who go down that route, it's important to share.
Thank you. Avneet, I'm going to ask you a slightly different question. I mean, some fantastic honesty sharing going on already in the panel. Has anything struck a chord for you? What challenges do you see as you look up towards, you know, where you'd like to get to in your career? What would be helpful for you?
God, it's a tough one. So many different themes, to be honest. I think you know, looking at, I think a couple of the things that have really struck a chord are things like, you know, being yourself, being unapologetic about and I can give you an example actually of where this has happened. So trying to get a settlement agreement, for example, over the line, and it's late in the day, I've got to feed my son, it's dinner time, it is out of hours, but I also need to take client instructions. And you're in this you're toying with, because you're a lawyer, you want to do the best you know, your client facing, you know, you want to do the best for your client, you're trying to get things moving on. So it's this ever juggle, and I think that is what, from my perspective, I found hard. And where I've seen others deal with it is they will just say, they will just compartmentalize. So, you know, now it's switch off time, and it's just having that raw kind of, and I think it comes down to culture as well, firm culture, certainly from a solicitor's perspective. And I think that's going to take time to do, but it's something that is really, really important, and it encourages the honesty, the being yourself, you know, the unapologetic nature of, yes, I'm, you know, this is what I'm doing. At pickup, this is real life. And actually, you know, I mean, I've recently changed firms, and what I've seen is an amazing culture, one of which is something simple. Like a couple of weeks ago, we had an urgent client call that had to come in, and it was just at pickup time. And, you know, and the males that I worked with in the team, they asked me, they said, you know, is this a convenient time for you? And I could be honest, because that is the culture, and there's encouragement from the junior and the senior level, which, you know, you're all on the same hymn page, basically. You're on the same sheet. And I think, you know, that's kind of key from my perspective. And
Okay.
yeah, I'm trying to think of what more.
No,
really.
thank you.
I do think that's going to really help at all levels. Just, you know, being real.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask Helen if there are any questions in the chat to pick up now. And where we're going to go with this conversation is around this idea of 24/7 culture, because I think we've been dancing around it a little bit, and I want to kind of go there and also think about how we can support each other, particularly around this idea of the 24/7 culture. But before we do that, Helen, are there any questions in the chat?
Yeah, there's quite a few coming through. One has come through that I thought would be quite interesting to look at. So how do you think we can ensure that men come along with us in this conversation, in particular senior associate men who might think that the current discussion is going to result in them being overlooked?
Thank you. I'm going to start with my thoughts on that, and then we'll throw it open to others, because I think I'm sure, like many of you, do many talks on gender, and it's interesting that it is always women who sign up, and men are often absent from the conversation. And we've, you know, various different ways been talking about how important it is to have men as part of the conversation. And I think particularly when we start talking about the 24/7 culture, when we start thinking about, you know, and Nikki, you mentioned it there, in terms of actually both parents, you know, having a role in bringing up children, which is, you know, something to be encouraged and welcomed. So for me, actually, it's about thinking beyond gender and thinking about, well, what is the culture that we have in law, and how does that damage everyone, and how can it be more supportive of everyone? So that's my view, but what do others think?
Claire, I don't mind having I have a perspective on this. I did a lot of work after Black Lives Matter sort of took a bit of, after George Floyd's death, there was a lot of work by a lot of organisations, and I spent a lot of time talking to men and others. And I found that really, really helpful, because the amount of people who have said to me, gosh, you are so lucky at this moment in time to be Black, to be gay, to be a woman. And at least it astounds me. And this is family members as much as it is people in the workplace. Isn't it a lucky time to be you? And I always say back to them, it isn't a lucky time. Actually, all we're trying to do is to bring everybody up to the same level playing field so that everybody can play fairly together. I don't think there's any other way than having conversations with others, with men, bringing them along and including them in the conversation and sharing stories so that they can understand. And we've had such success when you've actually approached it in that way, rather than having conversations in our echo chambers. So it's a lot of work, but I think having those honest conversations repeatedly with people to help to try and see what their concerns are, and then explain your perspective and having an open and honest conversation about it, I think that's been hugely helpful. It's happening less now, actually, and it sort of needs to resurrect again and start having those conversations again, because I don't think it can stop. I think there is a danger. There was a study that had come out recently that was saying the younger generation of males, actually, they're the ones who think that enough's been done now, and if anything, it's tipping in the wrong direction, whereas I think some of the older generation of males still recognize it because they understand it and they've heard enough. So, you know, it's probably conversations in schools, it's conversations in universities, it's conversations with junior lawyers and team members to help them understand what this is about and what we're hoping to achieve, that level playing field, not trying to get everybody else ahead in spite of them.
Yeah,
but I think it's also really important that we don't end up with this division, where one side sees it as bad for them. Actually, I'd say the converse is true. It should be good for them. So
Correct.
If you look at things like research into diversity in decision making, so within arbitral tribunals, men actually enjoy it more when you have that balance. So it's actually, you know, or if we're talking about 24/7 culture, two of the most difficult things I've dealt with this year have actually been young fathers, very, very isolated, gone back and, you know, and at home, their partners expected them to do everything. At work, they were expected to do everything. And, you know, both of them ending up in an absolute crisis of just not being able to cope, but having no one to talk to. Lots of men don't have the male characteristics that we're talking about. So it makes for a more diverse, it makes for a happier environment for everybody. I've also been amazed in lockdown with the number of men who've come forward to say, I really enjoy picking my children up, but I never felt able to say it before. So, you know, law is very conservative. And I went to a very interesting talk about shared parental leave within the sort of tech industry, where they're much more advanced, where, you know, it's become much more routine for men and women to share leave. But within a profession like law, which is very conservative, I don't think it is. I think with barristers, actually, now I've seen a lot of younger male barristers taking equal time off. I don't know what it's like within firms. I don't get the impression yet that we're at that point. But once men start doing that, it also gives men an insight into the less glamorous things about looking after children, or the difficulty, or the constant admin. And I think the day that men and women share children's admin equally will be wonderful. But I think it's very, very important that it's seen as a positive, and the minute it starts seen as a negative or an us and them, and also that it detracts from that, it doesn't. It's as Nina said, it's trying to level it up and make it fairer for everybody. But that doesn't mean that the really good senior associates who are white men won't get through either. They will.
Correct.
Yeah, and I think we often forget the power of our own voice and our own stories. And you know, often when I speak to men about kind of this topic in particular, and there are lots of studies around diversity generally, that the fear of saying the wrong thing is something that holds people back. And actually, the more we have these conversations, the less people fear saying the wrong things. And I think we need those spaces where men, women, where everyone can kind of feel like they can share without fear of saying the wrong thing.
And ask questions, Claire, without fear of saying the wrong thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we've got about 15 minutes left. I've said I wanted to start thinking about this idea of the 24/7 culture, because I think it has a lot to answer for, and I think it harms men and women equally. The profession, again, lots of statistics around how burnt out the profession is. And I think actually, if there's one discussion where the whole ecosystem needs to come together to think about perhaps a different way, the 24/7 culture is perhaps it. So Nikki, let's start with you, because you're in private practice. You know, the expectation that you have to work lots of hours, and you know, the impact that has. What are your thoughts? And you know, what would you like to see? We've got a client on the call, we've got Silks on the call. What would you like to see?
So I think, again, it comes down to role modeling to some extent. There is, you know, we work in a profession where things are often urgent, where you have to work very hard. It's not a 9-to-5 job. That is the reality. And I think most people accept that. But I think what has happened traditionally is that things are treated as urgent when they're not. A working day is treated as a 12-hour working day when that ought to be only in circumstances where it's really necessary and there's something particularly urgent. And then there should be, a quiet period that follows that rather than loading people up with cases. And so I think part of that comes down to the role modeling of, as a partner on a case, how am I allocating work? How am I letting something sit on my desk for 3 days and then asking a junior or a counsel to deal with it urgently within the next 8 hours? Well, if I am, and I'd like, hopefully not, that's not good enough. That's my responsibility. I am creating that unnecessary urgency, and that's a problem. I also think, the way that I deal with things, if I'm replying to emails at 11 o'clock at night when I don't need to, and I'm copying in my juniors or my counsel team, or what am I telling them? What am I telling my client? I'm telling my client, yes, this is absolutely fine. This is on offer for you. This is how we work. We're a 24/7 shop. I think people in leadership roles need to be very mindful of the impression that they're giving to everybody else, the messages that they are sending, and only treat things as urgent, only do things late at night if it's necessary. As it happens from a personal perspective, I have 2 children, and so quite often I will work through the day. I have a lot of meetings. That's just the way that it is. I have BD, I have all of these other responsibilities. And so at night, if I don't have plans, I will sit on my sofa for an hour at 9 o'clock and I'll go through emails and I'll reply to things just because it suits me to have a clean slate the next morning. But the way that I deal with that with my juniors is when I have work with somebody new that I've never worked with before, we have a sit down at the beginning, a sort of housekeeping. And I say, what do I need to know about you? What, do you have any non-working days? Do you have any times that you would rather avoid unless it's urgent? And I tell them, I don't work on a Friday. So if something's urgent, of course, get in touch. But otherwise, when you're planning your work, when you're planning calls, etc., please bear that in mind. And I also say to them that it's my practice that I will often send you an email or copy you into an email sort of late at night, unless I have specifically told you in advance that you need to be online because there's something urgent. Please don't feel you need to read it. Please don't feel you need to respond to it. It's just, that's how I work, and I want you to work how you work. And I find that's really helpful because it just gives them that autonomy and permission to say, oh, great, I don't, Nikki's not going to judge me or think I'm not working as hard if I don't reply immediately to her email at 9 o'clock at night. So, and the reason I raise that is because it, in some respects, maybe slightly contradicts what I just said about, well, we shouldn't be sending emails late at night because what impression does that give? And the point, I think, is that we need to be mindful of what we are doing and what messages we are sending, and we need to deal with those appropriately, whilst also living a life that suits us and allowing our team to live a life that suits them. So if they want to be sending emails at 10 o'clock at night because they want to go to Pilates 9 till 10 in the morning, fine with me, as long as the work gets done, as long as the deadlines are met, as long as the clients are happy, and we're not making anybody else's life difficult within the team. We need to think as a team.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Mrs. Justice Cockrell and also Annalisa, because when we did the pre-call for this webinar, something struck me that Annalisa, actually you said, which is that, for a long time, barristers have been in the fortunate position that they can handle their workload. That's, one of the nice things about being self-employed as a barrister. So, and you've already alluded to the fact that you often will speak to the judiciary where you've got things that you need to perhaps change timetables and things. So I'd like to ask you and also Mrs. Justice Cockrell, what can perhaps private practice clients learn from the way that you operate, particularly thinking about this always on and 24/7 culture?
Well, I think we have a lot to learn from each other. I think it's got a lot worse. And in fact, lockdown, doing hearings online was a bit of a nightmare, because to me, the joy of going into court and turning that phone off, and I didn't receive any messages. Whereas now people want you to receive messages, online. And even if you're in court now, people would still think you'd have your phone on silent. Personally, I think it's really important to have some time in the day. Everyone should have some time in the day where they do not look at their phone at all. and that you should feel able to do that, because I think this creep is very invidious. And Nikki, I hear what you say, but I've also heard people say, well, a partner can say that to me, but once I've read that email, even if they've said, we'll deal with it tomorrow, I might think about it all night because I'm worried about something or I've missed something. So I think it's being aware of that. Or again, with the kids when they were small and I was giving them bath and I had phone in one hand and them in the other, I actually made a conscious choice to put the phone down for an hour. And if someone really, really needed me, they could ring me. But otherwise, I was like half reading this and half, I wasn't really doing either properly. So I think that's really important. And also having proper holidays. So I've noticed with a lot of young barristers now, I mean, obviously with kids, you have to be much more organized about holidays. But I've noticed a lot of firms will force people to have sabbaticals after a while, or, are people looking at how much holiday people are actually taking and saying, you haven't booked any holiday. So I know our clerks have looked at people's diaries and said, where's your holiday? Because actually then you will burn out. You need time. And during your holiday, it's trying to get to a point. I think the bar is still more fortunate than law firms in terms of being able to turn off. But I'm sure, Mrs. Justice Cockrell, when I started, you didn't have any communication with the judge between, being in court and coming in the next day. And I can actually remember the first time a judge sent an email after hours and everyone was shocked. But I mean, we all now work in different time zones. I think it's being aware of it. That's the reality of what we live in. And to a degree, you have to work with it to be successful. But where is your time to yourself? When's the time that I go running and just listen to music and I have my notifications turned off so I can actually do that. But where is your time to yourself? Do you lie in bed and read your phone? When you wake up, is the first thing you do look at your phone? Do you wake up in the night and read your phone? All of those things, being conscious of them.
Mrs. Justice Cockrell.
I'd say, I think maybe three things. The first is that when I started this job, it was a huge wake-up call to me, because you have your clerk interposed between you and the world. And if, as was the case at the time, you have an old-fashioned clerk, which I don't now, Laura is 24/7, but my clerk then switched off her computer at 4:30 and didn't switch it on again till 9:30. And suddenly this huge amount of quiet time appears. And the value of that after years at the bar where, things had become increasingly 24/7 was astonishing. That has taught me, firstly, I've got to try and preserve that. I've got to help others try and preserve that. I'm big on delayed send on emails. I may work on something at midnight, but I'll set it to send at 8:30 in the morning so that it's not putting pressure on somebody else. The second, totally with Annalise, on finding that bit of time, even if you can't carve out the 4:30 to 9:30. When I was judge in charge and there was more work to do than you can possibly contemplate. Every day there has to be a window for yoga. Otherwise, I go mad. And it's finding the ways to create those little bits of time where we're completely away from the pressures and we can draw breath and find ways to help other people do that.
Thank you. Now,
and final thing. Please don't think the judiciary don't know about the stress. We may not inhabit it the same way, but we are having a conversation about wellness and stress. It does still exist, and we really want to hear. We don't want to break anybody.
Thank you. I'm going to be slightly controversial, maybe, in my question now to Nina and also to Avneet. So my question, I will pose it, and then we'll see who wants to go first. Avneet, my question is: you're sat there as a senior associate, and I wonder whether you feel empowered to be able to take a day, an hour in your day, to be able to do yoga or go for a run or whatever it might be. You're nodding, so that's good.
Absolutely.
Nina, my question to you, because I speak to lots of clients, and I've heard from clients say, legal fees are expensive. We spend a lot of money on our lawyers, and and as part of that, and because of the way we work, we need lawyers to get things done when we need them to get them done. So what's your sense of that? What can you do as a client, but also what can the profession more broadly do to start to kind of really address some of the issues?
So I do think we've got a big part as the client, Claire, to play in it. and I'll be quite honest in my response, because when I work well with law firms, so I've got certain law firms who we work really well with, and we do a little bit of what Nikki's talked about, which we set expectations, we have conversations at the start about how do you work, what's important, how do we make sure that we don't store everything up, because sometimes I will be really busy during the week, and it does mean that you fire everything out to them on a Thursday, and actually then I suddenly need it by the Friday, and that's really unhelpful for them. So I try to have those conversations and have those different ways of working so that we can make sure things like that don't happen, and only are they working on truly urgent things that need to be. Those ones work really, really well. The ones that work less well, interestingly, are the ones where we haven't had that relationship conversation at the outset, and who charge an utter fortune. Now, terribly, me internally, and also the people like the CFO internally, will see those individuals and those law firms as almost slightly more robotic, and the expectations on them from the 24/7 hour culture is really high. We need this thing tomorrow. I'm giving instructions at this time of night. I want it tomorrow. We're paying this fee. When I reflect on that, I feel really uncomfortable, because actually they are still individuals. They might be paying £1,500 per hour, but they're still individuals, and they can still have stress levels. And the thing that I try to do to mitigate that, one, I've got to do better, and I've got to build that relationship and that trust. But in the absence of that, is I'm really conscious about sort of risk assessing things and checking in. So when somebody may have worked all hours, God sends, having a conversation afterwards about how we can make sure we do better next time, just checking in the individuals, because often it's a trainee, it might be the 1,500 partner who's taken the instructions, but the work is delegated to the trainee who's suddenly working overnight until 4 a.m. in the morning to deliver the thing that I've asked for. And I'm checking myself on those types of things, because it's adding to the stress of this system. And I think I've got a really important part to play in it to make sure that that doesn't become a norm, and actually we break that.
Thank you. I'm going to come to you, Avneet, because you nodded, so hopefully that's the answer. But conscious of time, so what I'd like to do, just kind of in the last kind of minute or two, is for everyone just to provide either a something that you might do differently with the hat that you're wearing on, or something that you might like someone else in the system to think about or do slightly differently to help with what we're talking about today, which is to try and see more women represented at the top. So I will start with you, Avneet. What would you like to see? Where, what can others who are in positions of power do to help?
I think probably going back to my point right at the beginning is role modeling. That I think is key. Just making going for partnership something that you would want, making it appealing. And another point I'd say, just some of the key points that have been drawn out is, a schedule send, like Mrs. Justice Cockrell mentioned. I use that a lot, to be honest, because I do work in the evening. The reality is flexibility with work when you're doing pickup, and those hours, it's not that you have to make it up, but you've got work to do. So naturally the reality is it happens in the evening after bedtime. So yeah, it's using that kind of schedule send that also it doesn't appear that you're working really late, and that can be a negative thing sometimes, that a partner might perceive that why can't she manage her day better, and there's constant questions, but it's just being honest and saying, like Nikki also mentioned, doing that housekeeping thing right at the beginning, when you're working with an associate or partner. It's just to say, well, what is your daily pattern like? And what's important to you? What are your, have you got classes what are your non-negotiables? So I'd say those are the kind of key points that I'd say I've taken from this.
Thank you. Annalisa, we'll go to you next.
Two things. Think about the language you're using all the time. One example this week is actually a man pointed out to a female solicitor of mine that she wrote the letter, Dear Sirs, which she was horrified about. She'd done it, she just programmed it in. Second point is, think about the counsel you're using. Are they diverse? ask if you're a client or a solicitor, maybe to have a Zoom call with a woman or a man who you haven't used before, and see if you like them, if you get on with them, if you might be able to work with them.
Thank you. Nikki.
Well, I obviously need to think about schedule send. Although, yeah, I have considered that before, but I'm just so nervous that it won't go, and also, or that it won't go at the time it needs to. And also then you are risking, not that I'm criticising the scheduled send, but you are risking the Nina problem of then suddenly everyone gets those things at 9 a.m. on a morning when they might have a day full of meetings. So I think I am more for open conversation so everyone knows where the expectations lie, but then actually treating everyone as grown-ups and giving them the autonomy that if they would rather see an email at 9 o'clock at night because they have an all-day meeting the next day, allowing that. But I suppose my takeaway is to give that some more thought. And also I think for me, I think it's really important to use the male allies and create the male allies within the leadership structure, and within my firm, but within the profession, to try to speed up the progress for women partners in law firms.
Thank you. Mrs. Justice Cockrell.
The thing which has come across to me is how important the conversation is at all levels, because I think, at my level, you can kind of lose track of what's causing stress for people elsewhere. And then, people at other levels of the profession maybe don't know what problems we have encountered over the years and what we are familiar with. And so I think something like this, where you talk to people who are at all different stages of the professional curve and understand the different factors which operate, that's something we should be doing more often.
Thank you. And Nina.
One of my biggest things, and Annalisa, you triggered me to, we didn't talk about it, is as a client to ask for and require that diverse list. Actually, all my senior lawyers are male, and much of that is because my board's male, and that's who they've used previously, and they come through as recommendations. I think I'm in a position now where I'm able to make sure that there is a diverse representation on our list. And that we're actually giving really good work to senior female counsel and private practice lawyers.
Thank you. I think I've managed to pick up everyone. I know there are some questions that have gone unanswered, but we could have spoken for a lot longer. But thank you so much to everyone who's joined us this morning, and thank you to all of my panelists for what's been a really fantastic conversation. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Claire. More podcasts like this to keep the conversation going.
Definitely. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.